big things happening at the graph. If you want to see that video or any other video that the graph posts, you should definitely subscribe to their YouTube channel. They post a lot of helpful stuff. Anyways, so welcome to Brain Fried. This is the first video that I'm deciding to make about crypto. And in particular, we're going to start with the graph protocol. I want to give you a little bit of an engineer's perspective on some of the things I look at when I'm kind of doing an analysis on a new projects that I find or new things that get sent to me. So we're going to do a little bit more in-depth stuff with the graph. I'm not a developer with the graph. It's not a tutorial, but just to give you my point of view as an engineer of some of the things that I look at, the good, the bad, the ugly of the graph. But I am going to assume that you probably look through some other videos or saw some of the documentation on the graph, and it's just maybe not providing enough, or you're just not understanding it clearly. So we're going to kind of step through some of that. So one of the things that when I started looking into the graph, I was like, okay, this is very cool. You know, they're indexing different different data. They're pulling it in and they're making it accessible to other projects. And people are getting, you get money based on the queries. The system is not simple, but the UI is very nice. And anytime especially when you're developing, the biggest issue that I have when I'm developing is when you come into new libraries or something, the documentation has to be there. You hit the ground running when you have that documentation. Just for the sake of completeness, this is I believe, let me refresh. All right, this is the current graph price as of today, as of this recording. There was a bit of a drop a few days ago. I'm not going to get into that though. So the graph website, as I said, has a lot of documentation. We're going to step through all of it, and not from a developer perspective, but from just an analysis perspective. So one of the things that they do have is they do have their own API, and from my understanding, they actually have they support two different query languages. One of them is the GraphQL, and the other one is what is it called? Well, it'll come up. I'll point it out when it comes up. But so I saw two different query languages, and I haven't written anything in these query languages, but I imagine them to be very similar to other query languages, like what's it called? I don't know, like MySQL query language or something like that. jQuery. I don't know. I'm a embedded systems engineer, so originally when the graph was started off, they were hosting these subgraphs on their server as a centralized server, from my understanding. And they recently, when I say recently, I'm saying within the last 2 months, and they actually have a video, I believe, announcing that they're migrating these subgraphs, or making them capable to migrate to a distributed network. So much is getting built, and I do think there is a lot getting built. I'm going to back up for a second, and we'll come back to this. But so if we back up to the graph protocols, social media, I don't follow them on other social media, but just looking at their YouTube channel, so they initially posted stuff starting 2 years ago, and that's a good sign. Anytime I see a project that is greater than a year, even greater than 2 years, like, the longer that it's been alive, the better type thing. Anything less than a year, I'm starting to get skeptical because of this whole crypto wave. Investors will throw money at anything. So people, some companies, the sketchy companies, do the whole pump and dump thing. So anytime a company has been around for a long time, that's a good, that's a green check mark. They check that box in my book. The other thing is recent and frequent updates, and they do have that even just on their YouTube channel. I don't know about the other social medias, like I said, but they do have recent and frequent updates. So that, check box there. So before I move on, one of the updates that the graph put out in their YouTube channel is they moved to core dev updates. And what that means is they distributed the development work across multiple contributors, and they're all collaborating to basically contribute, to the Git repository. And we'll actually look at the Git in a second too. Some of the companies to point out are Semiotic AI that were mentioned in one of the meetings that I listened to, Streaming Fast, Edge and Node, LimeChain. So I'm just going to briefly discuss some of the things that they mentioned that their contribution to what their contribution to the graph will be. Semiotic, they do reinforcement learning, so they introduce AI, which is not a new technology, but they're focusing on their contribution is focusing on automating decisions and automating pricing for indexers, since an indexer's price can vary based on machinery, or their latency can change. Everything gets changed so fast that they're automating that process. Streaming Fast is looking at parallel processing, kind of, from the gist of what I got from it. They're Streaming Fast technology. It sounds like it's all based on files, just converting this whole blockchain into a file-based system for processing. Files are very friendly, which that's widely known. Linux, everything is a file in Linux. And that's because they're very friendly to work with. So that's definitely a good contribution. It's a good way to go, in my opinion. They were applying their technology with PancakeSwap, which is a clone of Uniswap, and we'll look at Uniswap here in a second. And then what else? LimeChain. LimeChain's focus on unit testing. So when you distribute the work across core devs, then you have to basically establish some type of unit testing in order to collaborate efficiently. Yeah. So the core devs is, I think, going to speed up some of these updates. So in one of the core devs meeting, they say that their goal is to actually publish updates, patches, basically every. Hang on one second. Now I know not to take any calls while I'm making these videos. All right, so let's just jump into the documentation. So the graph, they basically define 4 major roles. They also define some other roles sometimes, which I'm not super clear on, like I don't know. Well, it might come up, it'll probably come up later, but when you're a developer, here's documentation I was talking about. They tell you how to do everything. And this is very valuable. This is very useful when you're thinking about how platforms can expand, can support development. This is one of the biggest things. Indexer. So the indexers are node operators in the graph network that stake graph tokens, GRT, in order to provide indexing and query processing services. Pretty straightforward. We're going to dive deeper into that in a second. Get the definitions out of the way. Curators are critical to the graph distribution. They use the knowledge of the Web3 ecosystem to assess and signal the subgraph that should be indexed to the graph network. And then they have delegator. Delegators must use their best judgment to choose indexers that will do a good job. So they delegate stake to indexers. Curators delegate stake to, basically they delegate stake to subgraphs, and that's kind of their interaction. Developer develops, indexer indexes, curator will stake to subgraphs, and delegator will stake to indexers. So recently they also introduced the Subgraph Studio. Like I said, their UI is very good. So you could create subgraphs and their necessary API keys pretty simply. You just have to connect a wallet, and you're off. You're off to the races. Graph Explorer, you can see all their existing graphs, and we'll go through some of those. So some of the interesting, when I was, I didn't expect some of these projects to be using this, but if we search here, so this is the Graph Explorer that I just talked about, and then they have the Create Subgraph option, which will bring you to the, why am I blinking so much today? The Subgraph Studio. So here we're just going to search, if we wanted to see the data set or the subgraph for Uniswap, if we wanted to index, or if we wanted to query this subgraph, then we would hit query, and then here's the query URL, and then you would, if, I don't know if this one charges, how much it charges, but the query fees, here's 30-day query fees, and then here's the curations of this subgraph. So basically, if I'm a curator and I see this Uniswap, or even if I post this Uniswap, this has to be signaled. So I can signal it as a curator. I just have to connect some kind of wallet. And you see that signal that you just signaled to the indexers to start indexing this subgraph. Until this is signaled, the subgraph is signaled, the indexers won't index it. So this is uniswap.com, and let's just dive into what Uniswap is doing. I heard some interesting things about Uniswap. I don't know. This is not the place for gossip, but if you want to hear interesting things, look up Uniswap news. All right, I'm going to hit refresh. We're just going to monitor these calls that are being made from Uniswap. And what we'll see is, let me expand this. Let me shoot this over here. Oops. So these calls here are being serviced through the Graph API. You can see, so when I hover over it, you see HTTPS API .thegraph.com subgraphs name Uniswap Uniswap v3. So it's actually, it tells you which subgraph. You can kind of see a little bit of what it's doing. It's fetching data from the subgraph. So it's kind of cool to see it actually in action. Another interesting project that uses it is Decentraland. I don't know if you guys, if some people, if they're not into NFTs, they won't have heard of this, but if they are, it's interesting to see how the graph supports a wide range of different projects. And Decentraland will probably be another one that I cover in the future. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty a little bit. All right, so this is the in-depth documentation that's available on their website. All this stuff that I've showed you is available on the website. The graph, just go to the website, click on Docs, and then you should be able to find. I'll link the URL in the video. So let's just scroll through this documentation, this in-depth documentation, and I'll kind of point out some of the key parts. So full stack decentralization, that's really being achieved when you think about some of the new announcements with the decentralized migration of the subgraphs. So here's some of the other characters or roles that they introduced: the fisherman and the arbitrator. So we went through, indexers, curators, delegators. We went through that. This architecture diagram is not super clear when I was reading it. I mean, you can see kind of the user application layer, and then the Ethereum layer. I don't know. This architecture wasn't a very nice description, in my opinion. But that's the other thing that I didn't point out is the graph network is actually on Ethereum. All right, so here is a good diagram, in my opinion. So in the roles that we went over, right, curator, indexer, delegator, and then there's developer. First off, before I dive into it, it's important to note they're burning GRT, which is good. I like it when projects are burning some of their utility token. It balances out, so it's not inflationary type thing. But they don't give a formula for how they're deciding to burn. I think they say that I want to say they said it was an area of research. So the state channel settlement, query fees going to state channel settlement. The state channel monitors different states of all the parties involved in the transaction. But what you're really seeing from a high level perspective is the consumer and the indexer communicating. That's like the main goal of this whole thing. The consumer has to query some subgraph. They're going to get a list of indexers, like I said before. Oh, I wanted to show that actually. All right, so we'll go back to that because that's kind of in the subgraph explorer. You can actually see exactly what I'm talking about. So they want to basically choose the cheapest indexer or maybe the fastest indexer for. They want to get the best price. So it's going to burn the query tax, query fee tax, and then the query fees. So these query fees will get passed through into the indexer rewards, but the curator will also get a share of the query fees as well for curating, for signaling this graph. And then there's a curation tax that gets burned. One of the downsides, there's a curation tax to curate on a subgraph for a version of the subgraph. And when the version of the subgraph gets updated, I believe you have to pay the curation tax again. So as I said, the curator will mint shares or signal on a bonding curve and will get get a certain amount of shares based on how much they signal. And then the query fees come in as part of the index rewards. This is where the new GRT will be issued as well. So some of these query fees will get delegated as rebate basically. And as things get serviced, then indexers get paid. So it will burn residual rebates. And there is a rebate function that we'll look at that kind of supports this. The delegator, like I said, stakes on the indexer. If you're a delegator, you want to pick a fast indexer, efficient indexer, one that's a reliable, one that's always correct type thing. And then they burn some delegation tasks. So all this is the transaction, kind of high level functionality, I would say, supporting this transaction between the consumer and the indexer. This is just showing what I was explaining before. The consumer finds indexers for subgraph, whatever, XYZ, and the service discovery layer returns a list of indexers. And then they request prices and latency from the indexer, which get returned. And then the indexer will return a query response with the attestation that the query is correct. All right, let's go skim through part 2, and then I wanted to go back to a list of indexers, things like that the Graph Explorer provides. Indexer staking. So one of the bad things that when I was reading through this is the indexer staking from this documentation. Like I said, I don't know how up to date this is. The indexer has to stake something like, I think it was 100,000 GRT. You're not going to have very many indexers that can, everyday people who can just, shoot up a node and start indexing. So the share of the rebate pool that an indexer I receives during a time period is given here, and this is explained. I think it's explained better in this link here. It takes you to a wiki page. When they do this, they sum over all of the subgraphs. But when you're looking at the actual definition from the wiki page, they don't give it in that form. If you have interest in maybe I don't know if this provides the derivation, but if you want more information on that formula, you can check out the wiki there. Delegation, we talked about that. Curator signaling. Here's the bonding curve that I was referring to. So so on the y-axis, you see the price. You can mint shares at a certain price. So if you mint at current price, then you're going to get current shares on this bonding curve here. Indexer reward. Here's the reward function for the indexer. The reward, which is paid through new token issuance, is intended to incentivize indexers to index subgraphs that don't have significant query volume. So that's the point of the token issuance. This solves the bootstrapping problem for new graphs, which may not have pre-existing demand to attract indexers. Again, you're summing over all of this, all of the graphs. Omega ij is the amount that the indexer I is staked on subgraph J. Theta J is the, uppercase omega is the total amount staked on subgraph J. So you're dividing what the indexer has staked by the total amount staked. Psi is the total amount signaled to the network, and phi is the total network index of rewards denominated in GRT. So phi is the total in-network index of reward. Psi sub j is the amount of GRT signaled. Psi uppercase is the total amount signaled. This is not super interesting. Consumer, the micropayment that was mentioned earlier that the consumer pays gets locked by a mediator, and then it gets unlocked once the transaction is fulfilled. Future work. This is subgraph 101. Making sure protocol incentives can be made to function without being gameable for indexing and serving queries on other chains is an area of future research. That is an important aspect of mine. Let me read this whole paragraph. The graph hosted service currently supports several Ethereum compatible chains. We know that. And layer 2s, the graph protocol that is deployed on Ethereum mainnet will initially only support indexing Ethereum mainnet. That's the other issue that I had. When I first heard about the graph, I thought they were supporting multiple blockchains, but they're only supporting indexing Ethereum as a mainnet. Like only projects that are built on Ethereum, basically. And I don't know if that has changed. And serving queries on other chains is an area of future research. I guess it depends what they mean by protocol incentives. I initially thought of that as the token issuance. Personally, I hate when they say it's an area of future research because it's kind of like passing the buck along. Like, you know, whoever comes in next, it's, you know, please do this. And there's no set deadline, there's no promise that it'll happen. So anytime this is, even in research papers, you see this a lot with stuff when they just don't want to do something. It's like, this is an area of future research. It's like, well, that's the important part. So this is kind of a red flag in my eyes right there. But you know, things could have been updated that I didn't see. So let's circle back to the graph website, and they say here, a graph is indexing protocol for querying networks like Ethereum and IPFS. I feel like this is totally marketing words. Like this is how a marketing person would phrase it. And then a developer person would say, we index Ethereum and we also use IPFS, so we could index that too. Because IPFS, from my brief understanding, it's essentially just a distributed file system. And I believe the graph uses IPFS nodes in order to kind of support their transactions. So I feel like they're squeezing in the IPFS thing, but my hunch is that there are applications that are currently using this, you know, they're Ethereum. And even if you look at, you know, supported networks, Ethereum, Polygon, Arbitron, BSC, Celo, Avalanche, XDay, POA, Phantom. Some of these I haven't heard of, but you know, Celo, I believe that's based on Ethereum. Polygon, I believe, is based on, I think Arbitron is. You can double check these, but I understand like they're supporting these networks, but they're really just supporting a single blockchain. I have seen like news articles where, you know, the graph is Google of Web3, basically. And I don't see that you can get that with just supporting Ethereum. So maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe you know, I might be, you know, concerned for no reason. But if you have any insights on that or want to clarify, feel free to, you know, throw some comments in and we can have a discussion about that. Like I said, I'm learning too. You know, it's all learning process. All right, so let's dive into the graph. The Graph Explorer we looked at. Let's dive a little bit more into that. So let's go back to Uniswap. That's a fun one. Uniswap v2, and here's the versioning. Oh, one other thing about now that I see versioning is if we go into, we're going to come back to this. If we go into the graph Git, again, they have lots of updates, which is good. I always see updates here. If we just go, let's just look at the graph node here. You know, what commit was made yesterday. Looks like commit got xnade there. So 2 days ago, day ago, a lot of updates. That's a good thing. But if we go to the version of the graph as an indexer tags, so they really don't have a major release of the graph, which is good, right? Because there's a lot, and even they said this, there's a lot that needs to be done, and what they want to try to plan what wants to be packaged into a major release, but they have yet to release like a version 1, and I don't know how long it's going to take, or like what they actually want inside the version 1. So that's definitely a good question, I suppose, for the actual developers. All right, so yeah, I just want to point that out in terms of the versioning. Let's go back here. And I wanted to look at the indexers. So if we go into the indexers, you can actually see how much stake each indexer has allocated for the subgraph. And it's ridiculous. Like, really? I can't be an indexer. There's no way. Like, I would never get any query requests. This is what the indexer keeps. So the indexer keeps 76% when splitting with delegator. So anyways, they tell you all their parameters. If I wanted to delegate for this guy, I could delegate here. The UI is super nice that way. And I can also see, I believe I could see what else this indexer is indexing. So when the consumer is presented is trying to query a subgraph, this is kind of what he'll see. He'll see this list of indexers. That might be it for me on the graph. One thing I will say is as they release more stuff, I will keep my eye on this. And these core dev meetings are super informational. So if you have interest in following them on those, it's definitely worth the hour worth the hour watch. I do expect a lot more updates coming, since they did release that they want to maintain, I believe, 2 to 4 week gap between each patch or each minor update. And I am curious to see what they're planning to put into a major release of the graph and when that might happen. So overall, I do think it is a good project. It's definitely a good project. It's been around for long enough where they know the issues. They've experienced enough issues. They've experienced enough ups and downs type stuff. And the fact that they're still progressing and they're still pushing, they're implementing more stuff, and they have plans to move further faster. It's definitely a good view in my book. And that you can see their Git, and you can see all their updates. And if you're code savvy, definitely dive into some of that. And if you see any red flags, point them out, and I'll definitely dive into that as well. But yeah, my plan wasn't really to dive into the code of the graph, but I'll dive into parts of it if there's questions about it. I think that's a good first video for this channel, and we'll see how it goes from here. I think next one I want to do is that I've been reading a lot about and diving into is like Ecomi is very interesting, just from a more of a logistics standpoint, I guess, and not so much of the technical part. But I do want to try to stay technical. So, or we could even look at some of these core development companies relating to the graph. Streaming fast. We can see their work. We could see EdgeNode, some of their stuff. Lime Chain. We can look at Semiotic AI. Let me know how to improve this video first off, so I can, so the next one can be a little bit better, then so on and so forth. So it'll only get better from here. Hopefully this was tolerable. We'll keep this up, and we'll keep diving into different projects. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.